I'm Sheldon McLeod, and this is Thinking Out Loud on SaltWire. Thank you very much for spending some time with us as we dig into some of the issues that are important. And I know food inflation slowed this week. The overall inflation rate was down slightly from where it was a year ago when it was unprecedented. Numbers we hadn't seen in 30-some years. So, yes, the pace of inflation is slowing, but it just means things are getting more expensive less quickly. And I wanted to talk about this because I had received a news release from the Canadian Centre of Policy Alternatives about a roundtable, a series of roundtables, community conversations is described to discuss the cost of living crisis here in this province. And as it was pointed out, no one should live in poverty in our province, and yet thousands of adults and 31,370 children do. That's a staggering number. To talk a little bit about it, and it has a bit to do with a report that was released talking about child poverty rates here in Nova Scotia. Kids can't wait. And wanted to invite two people to the conversation. We have Leila Sarangi here for Sarangi. Sorry, Leila is Director of Campaign 2000. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
And it looks like Dorothy Halliday just dropped from the call here, so we'll hopefully have her in just a second rejoining this conversation. For folks who don't know, tell us about Campaign 2000, first of all.
Yeah, Campaign 2000 is a pan-Canadian coalition of community-based organizations and charities, social planning councils, legal aid clinics, community service organizations. There's over 120 organizations who are members of Campaign 2000, and our mission is to end child and family poverty. We came about in response to a 1989 promise at that a federal resolution that was passed unanimously in 1989 at the House of Commons to end child poverty by the year 2000. So that is where we get our name from. That was the resolution that birthed our movement, and we are hosted by Family Service Toronto. So I actually come from Toronto. Family Service Toronto is a community-based organization that has been hosting this campaign for now 32 years. And we've been writing those annual report cards nationally and in several provinces and some territories for decades.
Nova Scotia falls in at about 24.3% child poverty, and it does vary by geographic region, I think in a very wise way. It was tagged to federal ridings, which is a good indication to the politicians who represent Nova Scotians for the party that they were elected under. So tell me about, what's this report card showing you overall before we talk about what people are saying about it?
Well, this report card shows a couple of things overall. There are still very significant levels of child poverty rates, any which way you slice it. So if you look at the provinces, the territories, nationally, we have really high rates of child poverty. Nationally, it's 13.5%, a million children across the country. If you look at smaller levels, you're going down to federal ridings or the neighborhood level, you still have really high rates of poverty throughout, even when you're looking at very local levels. So the federal government promised to end child poverty, but we're not there yet. What this report card, our latest report card did show is it looks at 2020 data. There's a bit of a lag in the data. So in 2020, what happened? We had a global pandemic. Big parts of the economy shut down, and the government stepped up in a really big way. The federal government injected a lot of money, a lot of government transfers directly to individuals, to families, top-ups to existing programs like the Canada Child Benefit, but they implemented new programs like the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. And what the data tells us, and what experience told us, is that money that they received made a really big difference in their day-to-day lives. We heard from mothers who are caring for kids with disabilities that this was the first time they were able to pay rent, put enough food on the table, and buy their medication in 1 month. We talk about the cost of living crisis right now, but for the families we are talking about and concerned about, they've been struggling with poverty for a very, very long time. And the current cost of living crisis is just compounding these experiences that they've been facing for years.
When you open up the floor to a conversation about poverty and hunger and kids who don't have enough, it's a difficult subject for a lot of people, but I'm sure it's one that folks have a lot of passion about. So tell me, what are you hearing about this struggle in 2023?
I mean, we are hearing really difficult things that young people are going through. And so in Sydney Mines, we were just here in Sydney Mines. We had a community conversation with 20 young people. And then the next day we had a roundtable conversation with people working in communities, with people working in government, and some of the young people came back to join that conversation and share some of their experiences. And what we are hearing across the board, we're doing this tour across the country, but here we heard real significant challenges with not having enough. Of course, income is one piece of the experience, but poverty is very dynamic. So not only do people not have enough income, the jobs aren't giving them enough wages, social assistance programs aren't giving them enough even to pay rent, let alone buy things for their kids or pay for their utilities or pay for their car when it breaks down, like the brakes break down or you need to top up with gas, and they don't have that kind of money. So then they can't get their kids to the daycare or they can't get themselves to work. There's not enough transportation. But the other thing people are saying really clearly to us too is that they don't have enough supports, and especially these young folks are talking about how they don't have a trusted, caring adult or community of adults aside from folks like Dorothy, who I hope can join us and talk about some of the work she's doing, because they turn to these community organizations who become the lifeline, who are the folks who are in those neighborhoods, who know those challenges and who are supporting with solutions. And Dorothy's organization does so much in terms of supporting young people to meet their basic needs, but then develop their leadership skills and develop their life skills so that they can flourish and thrive in these really difficult environments. And they do it on a very, very shoestring budget. So it really depends on people like Dorothy who are committed to making their communities better. My job is to look at all of that and think about and talk to the federal. We work federally. Our partners like Christine Saulnier at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives works at the provincial level. But our job is to talk about these best practices within communities and translate that into public policy recommendations so we can have a public policy and a systemic environment that can support and be enabling, and so that it doesn't rely on only small community organizations who don't have enough money to help these kids, and not just kids, but there's adults and families who are struggling as well, meet their needs.
Which is the challenge as well. Just to circle back, we hear about internet connections. It's not just a luxury anymore; it's a necessity. In e-learning through the pandemic and challenges with that infrastructure. So clearly, we have a goal about eradicating child poverty, but it's going the other way. That's got to be disheartening in a lot of ways.
I mean, it is, but then it also kind of fuels the fire to say, like, we know what works. We know what we need to do. The CERB taught us so much about what we need to do that we can fix. We saw in 2020 a drop in child poverty rates. So we've been looking at and tracking child poverty rates year over year since 1991 is when we first wrote our national report card. And we can see that number it goes up a little bit after 1991. It peaked in the year 2000 when child poverty was supposed to end. So nationally, the rate was almost one in 4 kids. It was just over 24% of kids lived in poverty. And then you see a little bit of a slow trending down in 2015, 2016, 2017 with the Canada Child Benefit. You see a bit more of a drop. But in 2020, the child poverty rate drops like we've never seen before. And I think in Nova Scotia, it dropped by about 24%. It was a really large decline that year. And that was because of that CERB coming into families, mostly because of the CERB and those other pandemic benefits. So we know when there is political will, there is a way to do this. There is a way to address poverty very quickly. And you can do that while building some of that social infrastructure that takes a bit longer, like deeply affordable housing, like accessible and available childcare spaces, like better transit and roads or cycling pathways or whatever. We know that there are ways in which we can do this and ways in which governments can move quickly to address the problem. So the situation is that it is very disheartening, but for the Campaign 2000 Coalition, I think it just fuels us more to say we know what needs to be done and it can be done. We are a very wealthy country. We have a lot of resources, and there is no reason that we should have such dramatic inequality in our society. There is no reason for that. It's the public policies that we have in place, and it's choices that we are making that result in these kinds of deep inequalities.
Dorothy, I'm hoping this connection has improved. I'm not sure if you're able to hear us in real time, but if you have any thoughts about where things are in your community and the work that you're doing.
Let's talk about political will. What we need immediately is a greater political will to engage community, to engage those with lived experience, and to acknowledge first that there is a crisis. Let's call it what it is. To make children, families, individuals, vulnerable populations, let's make communities, neighborhoods a priority and work from there, from the inside out, as opposed to the outside in. And we saw that in the last couple of days, that there's a willingness, certainly on the part of those with lived experience, diverse individuals with lived experience. There's a willingness on their part to share their experiences, which is very risky for many different reasons. And it takes a lot of courage, a lot of resilience. It's very emotional. So we have to have the difficult conversations, listen deeply, and work from the inside out, from the street level. And I'm not the only nonprofit that believes about this. I'm reminded of, every week I'm reminded in my work of what Gordie Goss taught us. And Gordie Goss was not only an MLA and Speaker of the House for the province of Nova Scotia, he developed a very sustained organization, the Whitney Pier Youth Club. It's very vibrant in that community. And Gordie used to always remind us that kids don't care what you know. They just want to know, and they want to feel, they want to experience that you care. And it's actually why our organization is called Community Cares. It's because we want to realize that.
And we lost the connection. So Leila, given all that you've heard, I'm wondering what the call to action is. How do we get a community to pay attention and do what's needed to end child poverty and help feed our kids?
Well, we need everybody to rise up, right? I think transformation will only happen at the political side if our elected officials know that their constituents are concerned about this. So I think what we have to do as caring community members is talk about it to each other, talk about our solutions to each other, and talk about our solutions to all of our elected representatives. And that's their job, is to listen to our concerns and respond appropriately. One of the reasons we're going out and talking to community members and people who are living in, violent and poor, like poverty situations, is because those folks, they know what they need. They know the solutions, and they have the ideas that they're communicating to us. And so we need to really listen and then work with them to communicate these ideas to our elected officials. That's how we're going to get the change, and we can all participate in that. I think if we are all talking about that and educating ourselves around what the challenges are, I think times, we can live these lives where we're not paying attention, and it becomes easy. That's our privilege, right? It's my privilege as somebody with a decent job and housing security and food security. I can turn away from this stuff, but I feel that my responsibility, and I think it's all of our responsibility, is to really look around in our communities and see what is happening and ask ourselves, is that fair? And what can we do to change that? And we can do that. We can make those changes by having these conversations and by raising it through our elected representatives. We have a lot of power in that kind of way.
Thank you to Leila Sarangi from Campaign 2000, as well Dorothy Halliday from Community Cares Youth Outreach in Sydney Mines. We appreciate the work that you're doing, for sharing some time with me today.
Thank you for having us today. Really appreciate it.